Welcome back to our panel discussion, The New Generation of Database, sponsored by MarkLogic, here on Federal News Radio 1500 AM and federalnewsradio.com. Our guests today are Taha Kass-Hout, Chief Health Informatics Officer at the Food and Drug Administration, Kenneth Bible, he's the Chief Technology Officer at the Marine Corps, and Cliff Dowse is Chief Information Architecture Division of the Army CIO Office, and Kevin Shelley, Vice President for Public Sector at MarkLogic. And we've been talking around the issue of the database itself, so I thought maybe in this segment I'd like to talk about database technology, where you're heading with it, because it is something that does evolve. People don't see it, but it's one of those things that evolves a lot over the decades. So why don't we start with Taha? What are you thinking of as you've talked about the modern infrastructure you're building and the new approach to data? What about database technology that really holds this all together?
Yeah, thank you. So right now we have a lot of relational databases at the FDA. However, over the last year we have been exploring many of the NoSQL options to deal with primarily unstructured data, also to help us with efficiency for compute. So, for example, if you're trying to run an algorithm at the front end, you can pretty much prepackage a lot of that information in a way that can scale nicely. So that's primarily where we are. We're still in exploration period. There's also the notion of an abstract layer, a search API, so to speak, and move more into API approach. So as you deal with a lot of legacy data, let's focus on where the data sits, regardless of the format or the container, and then provide, for example, could be adverse events API, could be recalls APIs, etc., and then provide access through an API, the application program interface, that also have a search appliance of a kind. So that way we can, almost like search on the internet, how we can, the search engines can vary depending on the ranking of getting you the data that you need. So that approach is sort of a new approach, hasn't been tried before. Has been tried a lot if you deal with logs, right. Large amount of logs, but this is now a technology we're trying to kind of bring into our world. And when we rolled out with OpenFDA this week, that was the technology that we use, a Elasticsearch of a kind that's the API is sort of built on. And of course, we're not limited to that one option. Still in research and development, there are many options in the market right now.
And that API idea, application programming interface, you hear that in the context of mobility a lot, but it's not just mobility, though, is it?
I mean, to us, mobility is getting you information anywhere, whether you're on a mobile device, a surface, at your desk, but also as the API, how we can connect systems to data, not just systems to systems.
Yeah, there's a lot more machine to machine in all of this.
Exactly, and also simplify the format in a ways that regardless where the data came from, whether it was text file, an XML, HL7, relation database, database is through these APIs will enable a more hierarchical structure. For example, like JSON files, that would be sort of the language of those APIs. Then developers internal to FDA, contractors outside, if it's public data, will have far more flexibility using many of the new type of databases or application languages to deliver to consumers.
So that means that the data itself becomes more like a supply than a thing.
Data is a tool. That's how we look at it.
Okay, and Cliff in the Army, and what does the JIE say about all of that? I mean, I think people tend to think of it as a network layer idea, but does it go down into the data, and how does that affect database technology?
Yeah, within the JIE, they are taking a look at, do we need to do some consolidation? There's a discussion. Part of the strategy is about implementing the duty data framework. But I echo what my FDA partner has just mentioned, that there are some things that we're also trying to do to make sure there's some efficiencies. The APIs he just mentioned, because the Army is such a big organization, you have different techniques. The business community has enterprise resources planning, the ERPs. They have a specific technique of handling data. Within the Intel, they have different ways. And one of the things I would add to the panel is that within the Army intelligence community, there's this notion of unified cloud data, and essentially being able to have something utilizing the Ozone widget framework to pull the data, again, getting to that notion of separating the data from application, so that analyst, that Intel analyst, can pull information from different sources and then help him or her perform his mission again, getting access to that data and utilizing that technology. So that's where we're headed. I would probably lastly comment that probably the other primary concern is making sure it's secured for obvious reasons, that you have to make sure that the data is secured, just as talked about previously.
And Kenneth, in the Marine Corps, what is the database technology strategy? Is that something that would also enable some of the new strategies you've been talking about?
I think so. Today, we have functional communities that have, as Cliff points out, built up things like financial systems or personnel systems that are fairly well tied to relational databases or the underlying ERP construct. I think, and I'm not going to be vendor specific, but in certain cases, those vendors intentionally built those connections. Their view was that the application was going to merge from the database rather than separating those two layers. And we're dealing with that legacy now as the technology moves forward and we move towards the separation of the data from the application layer, and we have NoSQL environments that we can address through APIs. So we've got a little bit of a journey there, but I do see the pilots that are going on within Marine Corps. We're looking very closely at these NoSQL environments to see what business intelligence we can gain. Some of the functional communities are more aggressive in this than others, and we're learning a lot as they try to aggregate data from their internal stovepipes. And they start to gain that business intelligence and understand how they will use these new technologies. One of the challenges I think we'll see in terms of database technologies, though, in particularly in the financial realm, is going to be what the term acid characteristics of the database, the ability to have consistency of the data so it's auditable. The audit is a big deal for all of us in DoD. We're trying to figure out how to get to a point where we meet the mandates to be able to be fully auditable in our books, financial process as well as financial systems. Some of these NoSQL databases don't really lend themselves very well to that. It's consistent as soon as people stop making transactions against it. So we have to think about that in terms of how we use database technology or what database technologies we select. But there's some really good motion to migrate towards these new approaches. One great example in the tactical realm is a program of record referred to as tactical service-oriented architecture, which is separating that application layer from the database layer and helping us reduce the footprint of the equipment that gets taken in our command operations centers, which is kind of that middleweight force when you're taking in a Marine Expeditionary Brigade. So it's the middle layer of the force structure that we might take and deploy. And they're doing some great work in trying to explore service-oriented architecture, explore the database technologies, and use that to help reduce their infrastructure. In the larger enterprise, as I mentioned, our functional owners, we're seeing the functional owners start to look at these technologies and apply them in their particular domains. And then I'm looking across those domains to try to make selections of what's going to be the horse that we can ride for the entire enterprise.
And Kevin, over the years, the challenges have varied. I mean, it used to be we worried about how do you use your production database for analytics without slowing it down, so then that gave notion to the data warehouse idea. But now, with the NoSQL and some other technologies, that there's new sets of challenges that are different from when you had relational databases and bolted on applications. So what are some of the best practices for data as a powering element for applications, but also as a big data and analytics type of tool simultaneously?
It requires a change of thinking. Most people have been using the relational model for the past 30 or 40 years.
Since COD.
Yeah, pretty much, right? And if you think about the primary vendor out there for a relational database, it's probably been the most dominant software product in the past 20 or 30 years. So the way to think about relational versus NoSQL with these two data types is very different. There is a big shift going on in the database market because of the new data types, right? So the relational model, while it is faster, less expensive, easier to maintain, it's still the relational model, and that hasn't changed in the past 30 or 40 years. It's rows and columns, and rows and columns do not lend itself to the new data types. And what NoSQL does, it enables you to ingest those new data types as is. The data immediately becomes searchable and can be leveraged in your applications. So your time to value with the NoSQL MarkLogic databases is really fast. Also, one primary characteristic that the NoSQL databases don't have is there's no need for a data model, right? So to do that type of thing in Oracle, to ingest new data sources, there's a lot of work that needs to happen to build and develop a data model, and as those data sources change, you have to change the data model. So the relational technology does not lend itself to what I would say agile development. So NoSQL, ingest data as is, immediately becomes available, and as far as the O&M tail on it, we've got a customer who just transitioned from 20 relational databases and 10 DBAs to one instance of MarkLogic and a half a DBA.
Okay, well, given all of that, what does that mean for application development? Because ultimately, all of this infrastructure we've been talking about is about the applications, which is ultimately about the missions. And so in the few minutes we have left, I just want to ask the government folks what you see ahead in application development to make use of these modern data structures, modern infrastructures, and modern data governance approaches that you've outlined. Cliff, why don't we start with the Army?
Sure. Within the Army, our foundation is really based on something called the Common Operating Environment, essentially taking all the different computing environments across the Army, command post, generating force, etc. And the notion is that you're going to standardize on hardware. We talked about that earlier, so that now the PMs or the material developers, they standardize on an infrastructure so that you're not changing because technology changes so frequently. And then now it allows them to focus on the software development. So utilizing things such as Ozone Widget Framework to allow them to crank out applications in software in a more timely manner, 6 to 18, because there are a lot of requirements coming in. We talked about the lessons learned from in-country. And that's one of the challenges that I think we've had across the DoD is how do we update these applications to meet the requirements coming in? And utilizing the normal process is a challenge. But going through a common operating environment where there's standardization and allowing the rapid development of applications enables that.
All right, and Kenneth, anything to add to that kind of DoD approach?
No, I think that's spot on. I mean, we're seeking the same kinds of commonality. We're aligned with JIE, trying to figure out where that's going in terms of supporting different nodes for data and different models for how we can go host applications or place them in a cloud environment. But again, going back to my foot stomp on the private cloud, I really see the real value coming from our getting the right platforms for our application developers to land on. The data becomes just a resource that they consume, and they focus their time on building application logic. That's really what they're after anyway. The number of different technologies that I can see emerging that will have a huge impact. I think we can't downplay or stress enough the importance of mobility going forward. It's becoming ubiquitous demand, and the challenge today is the government-provided devices that we currently pay for in field. Just fiscally, you can't provide them to everyone. So we've got to look at different strategies for how we provide that mobility capability to our workforce.
All right, and Taha, last word for you on application development and how all of this bottom of the pyramid we've been talking about ultimately affects the mission and those apps.
Yeah, so for us, I mean, regardless of the technology stack, and technology is constantly evolving. So the idea is, to move into DevOps, to try to focus on profiles. For example, you might need an Oracle in a window environment that's just one profile, or could be the ELK in the Elastic Log and Kibana in the Linux environment. So you'd be able to do that. So the user can focus on doing their work. The other thing is, it's not a culture change; it's really more of a mindset. change and bring in folks along into a different type of development that is user-centered, as well as agile development. And we have been trying that for a while right now, and we can see the benefits to those users, whether you end up with a mobile device application or mobile-friendly app to something far more complicated.
So you see maybe the mobile world and the desktop world kind of converging as we move ahead here?
And the tablets.
And the tablets. I guess that's something in between.
Yeah. If the people want to just carry something and do their, whether they're reading their email and editing
Sure.
documents, or they're really kind of taking swaps in the field. I mean, that's across the board.
I wish we had an hour more. Great discussion, but we do need to close our discussion. I want to thank today's guests, Taha Kass-Hout, Chief Health Informatics Officer at the Food and Drug Administration, Kenneth Bible, Chief Technology Officer at the Marine Corps, Kevin Shelley, Vice President for Public Sector at MarkLogic, and Cliff Dowse, the Chief Information Architecture Division for the Army CIO. I'm Tom Temin, Federal News Radio, 1500 AM.
On behalf of MarkLogic and Federal News Radio, thanks to the panel for this informative discussion. You'll be presented with some polling questions as you leave the webinar to help us improve future sessions. We appreciate your feedback. We'll have the archive from this session available shortly, and a link will be sent to you to share with your colleagues. Those of you who requested a training certificate for the webinar should receive it within the next 2 weeks. Please be sure to register for upcoming webinars from the Capital Exchange. This concludes today's webinar. Thank you.